There are few franchises, let alone movie monster franchises, that have had the impact that the Godzilla series has had. Since the radioactive lizard first rampaged on the movie screens in 1954, Godzilla has blossomed into one of the longest-running movie franchises in cinematic history, spanning 69 years with a total of 36 films. That is right, 36. With even more content on the way, with Legendary recently announcing an Apple TV series starring the titular character. And yet, if one were to just simply look at the concept behind the series, it would seem a little strange that Godzilla, of all things, became this big franchise. Conceptually, the original idea is rather simplistic. A giant monster is awakened by human activity and proceeds to rampage throughout a city. There are plenty of other movies that share this conceptual premise, but yet, while they remain one-off films, Godzilla has lived on, even in spite of some admittedly rather weak entries. Even more impressively, the franchise as a whole is pretty diverse in content, ranging from the more lighthearted entries of the Showa era to the more serious films in the Heisei and Millennium eras. How can this be? What are the elements that make Godzilla work as a franchise when other seemingly similar movies haven't panned out? Well, believe it or not, most entries of the Godzilla franchise actually pose a lot of interesting elements that can actually be traced back to the original 1954 film, Gojira. From the surface-level elements that were mentioned to some of the more deeper philosophical themes, the Godzilla franchise as a whole echoes the elements seen in Gojira. Naturally, given this wide diversity in the series, you might be wondering how this may be. Well, let's start with the most basic. Obviously, if there is to be discussion about how the premise of the Godzilla franchise works, the basic premise of the original must be addressed. Taking Gojira at the absolute face value, it is a monster movie, a film seeing a unique creature, something that isn't readily available in our current world, interacting and destroying the very global society that we interact with. Within Gojira, there are several main set pieces by which destruction takes center stage. The destruction of commercial ships being wrecked near Odo Island, Godzilla coming ashore on the island after the research team, led by Kyohei Yamane, arrives to investigate, and the two set pieces by which Godzilla makes landfall in Tokyo. While this destructive carnage might seem rather simplistic, these set pieces do have their merits. For one, these set pieces led to the creative testing of new visual and practical effects. In Gojira's case, the creation of Godzilla and the locations he destroys led to the advancement of a new art form, tokusatsu. Basically, using rubber suits, animatronics, unique camera angles, and a very elaborate miniature set to create a diegetic setting by which the action can take place. This technique, while dated by today's standards, is used to create the penultimate set piece of Godzilla terrorizing Tokyo, incorporating not only the physical elements mentioned, but also unique camera angles, such as low-angle shots to make Godzilla seem more menacing. This technique has been a defining part of the Godzilla series, and its advancement to create these set pieces is visible throughout the later eras of Godzilla films. From the updated monster design and updated beam effects of the Heisei films, such as The Return of Godzilla and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, to the inclusion of CGI effects in the Millennium films. Even when the films switched to entirely CG, like in Shin Godzilla, there is still a clear influence that all stems back to the original. Even aside from the revolution of effects, there is a sense of cathartic enjoyment that comes from destructive set pieces, which is evident through the responses to the MonsterVerse Godzilla films. While the original might portray this destruction through a sense of horror, later films switch this destruction from horror to catharsis, especially in the early Showa era films. From the monster bedding that occurs in the original King Kong vs. Godzilla, to the all-out monster brawls witnessed in Destroy All Monsters and eventually Godzilla Final Wars. However, while this does honor Godzilla, As mentioned, this is merely a tip of the iceberg reading of the franchise. Plenty of monster films from the 50s and onwards follow this, and yet aren't quite as successful as Godzilla. Even the Godzilla films that strictly focus on the carnage, like Godzilla vs. Gigan, aren't quite as well regarded. Whether you pick up on it or not, there is something beneath the surface of the original film and its better sequels that make it stand out. Another important element found within the original Gojira film, and by extension the entire franchise, is the theme of man versus the natural order. Godzilla, as clearly demonstrated through the sequence where Professor Yamane presents his findings to the Tokyo government, is a creature that long predates human existence, hailing from prehistoric times and embodying the original natural order of the Earth prior to civilization. There is even a spiritual emphasis on this idea, through Odo Island's inhabitants worshipping the titular monster as some sort of sea deity, again showcasing the supposed natural justice he holds. Godzilla is the natural response to human activity as he is awakened through military testing. To add on, there is also the presented dilemma of how to react when the natural order doesn't go in humankind's direction. This is clearly shown in the conversation between Yahame and Ogata. Either live with Godzilla to learn about its evolution, or attempt to destroy the ancient creature due to its destructive potential.
誰一人として見ていない。日本だけに現れた貴重な研究しろ。
しかし先生、だからといってあの凶暴な怪物をあのままほっとくわけにはいきません。
This theme of man's conflicts with the natural order is something that reoccurs often throughout the series. In the new MonsterVerse films, Godzilla and the other Titans are presented as the primordial rulers of Earth, with the deity status again appearing center stage. In the original Mothra vs. Godzilla, as well as its reboot in 1992, a primary theme is saving the world from environmental destruction perpetuated by mankind, shown through the perils faced by Mothra. In Godzilla Tokyo SOS, there is a natural conflict brought forth by Mothra against humanity for refusing to let the dead rest by creating Mechagodzilla out of the remains of the original 1954 Godzilla. Even many of the monsters showcased throughout the franchise are natural inhabitants that were disturbed by human activity, such as Ibira and Titanosaurus. This theme is constant and helps give the Godzilla franchise something to perpetually reflect upon over time as the way humans interact with the environment changes.
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around. Let them fight.
This theme of man versus nature might be one of the reasons why this franchise has been able to endure, but there is also something just a little deeper that might also contribute to the rise of Godzilla apart from other monster movies. There is a small, but very important tangent that has helped the character of Godzilla endure for so many years. While the general theme of man versus nature is a part of it, the most well-documented aspect of the original Gojira was the deeper political and societal messaging at play. Less than a decade prior, Japan had been ravaged by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and nuclear incidents like Lucky Dragon 5 had only served as a reminder of the horrors of nuclear weapons. Godzilla, within the context of this film, represents a nuclear holocaust. Go back to Godzilla's final rampage in Tokyo. Unlike most monster movies, which portray this type of destruction as a spectacle, the one found in Gojira is legitimately horrifying. You see the fires usher throughout the city, the imagery of people getting hurt and dying, the army being hopeless against such power, and the aftermath of it all, ruin and despair. This message is even directly communicated toward the film's end.
水爆実験が続けて行われるとしたら、あのゴジラの同類がまた世界のどこかへ現れてくるかもしれない。
This metaphor is also further seen through Dr. Serizawa and his creation of the oxygen destroyer, which directly mirrors the creator of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer. Serizawa, after inventing the oxygen destroyer, foolishly believes he can control the usage of his research, as seen in his interview with the reporter. However, when Emiko eventually breaks the secret in order to help Ogata stop Godzilla, he begins to break down, realizing the horror that is about to be released into the world. However, unlike Oppenheimer's later activism, Serizawa's realizations lead him to burn his research and take his own life in order to ensure the technology is never utilized again. Because, as Serizawa says himself,
もしも一旦このオキシジェンデストロイヤーを使ったら最後、世界の為政者たちが黙って見ているはずがないんだ。必ずこれを武器として使用するに決まっている。原爆対原爆、水爆対水爆。
This allegory of Gojira is what makes the film stand out as timeless. You feel the horrific trauma of Japan and emphasize with the desire to prevent weapons of mass destruction. While the presence of the aforementioned two elements in later films does honor the original, the Godzilla series as a whole reaches its peak when it harkens back to this political and social commentary. Take The Return of Godzilla, which brings this nuclear allegory to a Cold War setting, reflecting the international tensions between the USSR and US that existed at the time, and how this nuclear conflict affected outside countries, or even more recently with Shin Godzilla, which sees Godzilla as a result of nuclear waste, and showcases the inadequacies of politicians who focus more on formalities and optics over citizen well-being.
Those experts were useless. Get me some people who know something.
On it, sir.
This idea of the Godzilla series as a social and political allegory has also been seen in other ways as well, addressing other contemporary issues. Godzilla vs. Biollante dabbles in the ethics of genetic engineering, with the creature of Biollante being the result of unethical genetic tampering. Other films, like Godzilla vs. Hedorah, have a clear environmentalistic message, with the monster of Hedorah being the result of pollution. GMK, on the other hand, deals with Japan's own horrific histories, with Godzilla being the embodiment of all the souls killed by Japan in the Pacific conflict, seeking vengeance against a nation that would rather engage in reckless indulgence than remember what happened.
What?
Have deemed it preferable to forget the pain and the agony they inflicted on all those people.
While it may not be the same exact metaphor as the original, this capability of the series to serve as a metaphor for the current political and social climate has helped the longevity of Godzilla as a character. It makes it interesting to re-examine Godzilla as time progresses to see how he might fit with new contemporary issues. The original Gojira film is complex in many ways, but it is that complexity and that ability to see value across various readings that makes Godzilla work as a franchise. You could use it as a vehicle for visual and action development. You could explore the time-old tale of man's relationship with the Earth's natural order. Or you could explore the societal and political messaging of the monster. Regardless of which route a filmmaker chooses to take, they are all ways of interpreting Godzilla, with that flexibility being the reason why Godzilla is the iconic figure that he is today. In the end, while the franchise may vary in tone and quality, they all, at least in some capacity, honor the timeless classic that came before them.